Pat McDonald, happy Good Friday. This is one of my favorite annual.
It's not a good Friday, sir. It's a great Friday.
Hey, I didn't name the holiday. I'm just going with it. Um, but no, this is one of my favorite annual traditions is we talk about
Yes.
a religious themed movie on Good Friday. We've covered Dogma,
Yeah.
Godspell, a number of other films, and today we're going to be talking about a film that turns 50 this year.
Yes. Yeah.
1973's Norman Jewison directed Jesus Christ Superstar, a film that I had not watched until this morning.
Oh my.
Yeah.
And I've probably seen it 30 times. I'm legitimately, I've seen it 30 times.
How many of those have been on a big screen?
Oh man, have I seen it on the big screen? I'm not sure. I may have seen it in college in the big screen. I'm
Okay.
not sure. It's all blur now, you know.
Well, because
But
the whole time I'm watching it on my laptop, I'm thinking before I die, I have to find a way to see this at like a
yeah,
revival theater or something on a big screen because this is one of the coolest,
yeah.
most epic films I've ever seen. And
That's amazing.
yeah, and it's strange
I was going
because
to say too. Okay,
no, go ahead.
sorry. Oh, I was just going to say this time it struck me. I said, this is one of the great biblical epics because of its scope.
Yeah,
You
and
know, just to add to what you were saying.
well, it's also kind of unique, I think. And I remember much of Godspell, but not the whole thing. That was a contemporary, and it came out the same year as Jesus Christ Superstar, both 73 movies.
Both
Um,
both celebrating 50.
right. But that was more, it was a contemporary kind of an urban setting about the last, few days of Jesus's life, but it was still very much, we are in the moment. We're not commenting on contemporary society necessarily, except in the fact that we've got kind of a diverse, cast and, kind of hippie culture and all that. This movie, towards the end, and we'll get to it, and we're going to be talking spoilers here, folks, but towards the end, during the lead up to the crucifixion scene, there
He
is a,
dies.
what, yeah, spoiler alert, very big spoilers.
He dies.
But no,
He dies.
in the a vision that Jesus has as he's on his way to being crucified, he meets with Judas, and Judas is excoriating him, saying, why did you have to come back now instead of a more enlightened, or why couldn't you have come back during a more enlightened period like we are today? Why did you have to go, pop up in, Jerusalem thousands of years ago? And there is some modern context woven into the fabric of this story to really bring it home to audiences at the time. I think the message still kind of holds true now about the struggles between the material world and the spiritual world that are coming across in the Jesus stories of the Bible, which I wasn't prepared for, but I thought was really, really well done.
Had you heard the soundtrack before?
Heh. I'd seen the entire production before. Um,
Okay.
it's in high school. I briefly dated a girl who played Mary Magdalene in a high
Oh,
school stage production. And I went to go see that, and I was, not jazzed by it because, when you're 16 and you're watching this, it can be the
yeah.
case where like, oh, it's just a bunch of religious music. It's all the same thing. I know how this ends. I know where it's going. It's boring. I think as a 30 years later, I can much more appreciate what they were trying to say with the story.
Right.
And it's as if I'd never heard the songs before. I knew the melodies,
Oh,
of
wow.
course, Jesus Christ Superstar,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to love him, but I didn't really absorb the lyrics and the meaning until this morning.
Yeah. Oh, wow. You know, and this is something that culturally has been with me for over 50 years because my dad, who rarely went out and bought an album, I think after a certain point in his life, actually got this one. And I have it in my collection now. But the point is, we were putting this on the turntable when I was 10 years old, and that's a long time ago. And it's just part of my DNA. I think it's one of the greatest lyric music combinations ever put together. I think there's so much meaning in this piece, more meaning than anything I'd ever gotten out of my catechism or whatever you want to say. And even now in my atheist life, it a lot. I hate saying things like that, but in my spiritual life, I should say, it still has meaning, and it brings me closer to the person that Jesus was than anything I've ever studied before or known before. And I'm just a guy of the era, basically.
Yeah, I mean, my spiritual journey has taken a lot of twists and turns, and it's never ending, really. It won't end until I'm dead, and possibly not even then. But, I'm in a place now where one of the things that really speaks to me about this film is it's not a preachy, holy rolling kind of a film. It really
No.
does deal with the idea of we are just people. What would it mean to be in the presence of the embodiment of
Right,
God who's calling upon us to do these things that are unlike any other message we get in the culture or in our
right,
lives? And what's that struggle like? And it's not an easy struggle. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go follow Jesus. Everything's going to be great. It's a hard path, and it's not for
right,
everyone. And also the idea
right,
that it is a giant story that has been written and prophesized, and we are only pawns. And the movie isn't afraid to say at some points this doesn't quite seem fair. It
right.
particularly comes across in the character of Judas, he's almost the main character in this movie, played
He is
beautifully
the
by
main
Carl
character, I
Anderson.
think.
Yeah.
Oh man. The line in Superstar that says, "Why'd you pick such a backward time in such a strange land?" always resonated to me. And also Israel 4 BC had no mass communication. But but the fact that, when you think about a line like that, you're thinking it's amazing that this story, often called the greatest story ever told. In fact, that's another biblical movie. How did this permeate the layers of our culture and society and create this whole movement that still has an influence today, even though the message has been perverted in so many different directions?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because in the last couple of years, I've gotten to know the work of the Irwin brothers, who are, they're a Christian filmmaking duo. It was a couple of years ago they came out with a documentary called The Jesus Music. They did that Zachary Levi movie, American Underdog, and then just this year they came out with The Jesus Revolution, which is sort of an adaptation of
Right.
part of the Jesus Music story. And this was right around the same time. This is a couple years
Right.
into what was known as the Jesus Revolution, going from a
Right.
1968, I think, Time magazine cover of "Is God Dead?" to an awakening of Christian consciousness all over America. So this slots kind of right into it. And it's weird because this is a universal picture. This is not some
Right.
independent film. This is like a mainstream movie
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
caught on. It's very risky, especially because it has a lot of ideas that might be challenging to, Christian audiences even.
Well, I find it interesting that on the other side of the coin, after the production and everything, it came out in August of 73, and what a strange place to put that kind of movie. You'd think either near Christmas or near Easter,
Yeah.
but
Or
but
Good
maybe
Friday.
maybe it was released at that time because of, you know the somewhat controversial elements of it. For example, and I'm going to ask this up at the top so I don't forget,
Okay.
do you believe that this movie has tones of anti-Semitism in it? This was one of the criticisms of Superstar.
No. I
No,
mean,
I don't
and
believe
here's
it either, but I'm not Jewish, so I don't know.
and this is where I have to tread very lightly because, as you know, I've been
Right,
reviewing a lot of Indian cinema lately, and I've stepped
right,
in it a couple of times by bringing my kind of modern Western point of view into criticizing often
sure.
historical Indian dramas and, like, casting aspersions unwittingly, but so I can't really speak to that, but I understand the criticism, and it's something that I've recognized growing up as a Catholic kid for decades. Like,
Right.
That, yeah, he was the king of the Jews, but the Jews turned against him because they didn't believe he was the real Messiah. They don't believe that they don't believe the Messiah of their scripture has arrived yet. And they certainly don't think it's this guy. So, yes, and we saw this with the Passion of the Christ 20 years ago, the kind of the
Right.
bloodthirsty crucify him is seen as a very anti-Semitic idea. And I guess you can look at it that way. But in terms of the Christian faith and the story, it's just the way that it shook out in terms of the narrative that faith believes. I don't think there was anything particularly egregious about it,
Right.
except
Well,
except maybe the bit
Go
with Herod at the end, which we can talk to, because I call that section Jesus versus TikTok. Wow.
The great Josh Mostel, son of Zero Mostel.
I was wondering about that. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The the Last Supper is a Passover meal. Norman Jewison, one of the funniest anecdotes in that era is Norman Jewison was picked to direct Fiddler on the Roof because they thought he was Jewish. He wasn't. So here he does Fiddler on the Roof, and then he does Jesus Christ Superstar back to back. And it was Barry Dennen, who plays Pilate, who gave him the tape of Superstar and said, "Listen to this. This could be your next project," and it was. And but he said that virtually everybody in the movie is Jewish. How can it be anti-Semitic? It's just basically the politics of what occurred and what you just said. That no, we don't believe that this man is the Messiah. So again, we're made the scapegoats because of this movement. But I think within the story context, it doesn't seem to me to be anti-Semitic. But again, like you said, you step into different cultures as a Western white guy, and there's things that you trip on. You trip on constantly. So,
and if you think about it, and I'm going to tread lightly here, but in the context of 2,000 years ago, you've got a religion and a culture that is expecting the arrival of this savior, and you've got someone
right.
showing up who claims to be this person, but you also have, as they mentioned in the movie, there are dozens of people claiming to be the Messiah. You'd
Right.
probably be kind of pissed too. Like, stop trying to appropriate our belief system for whatever crackpot ideas you have. He just happens
Right.
to have been, according to different beliefs, the actual one, right? But I can't fault if this did happen, I can't fault the Jewish people for being indignant and outraged at this person who
Right.
was, threatening to shake the foundations of their beliefs.
I agree. And I also believe that you have to listen to the lyrics in this thing. I think when I think of Andrew Lloyd Webber at 22 and Tim Rice at 25 writing
Oh my
thing,
God, really?
It blows your mind. They're both still alive. 50 years later, they're both still alive. And the fact is that one of the key lines to me in it is, understand what power is, understand what glory is, understand it all. We don't know what that divinity is. We just try to possess it, and we can't possess it. And that's always the pursuit of a human being, that they never understand what power is. They never understand what glory is. They just pursue it in some sort of irrational definition that they come up with. So anyway, I
Right,
mean, we can move on from that.
Well, no, I mean, I think this is a good thing to settle on for a second and that's one of the messages of the movie, I think, is it's almost the pursuit of the wrong kind of power, because Jesus,
Right.
as played, I think, really wonderfully by Ted Neely in this movie, he's
Oh,
understated to the point
brilliant.
where he's not bombastic. The one time we really see him get his blood up is when he's turning over, basically wrecking the temple that people have turned into a marketplace, right? But a lot of it
Yeah.
is, love your neighbor, forgive people. It doesn't matter where you've come from or what you did. My best friend is a prostitute. Just
Right.
that is the kind of power that really is transformative. But people think that power lies in gold or in Judas's case, silver. Even
Right.
though he tried to reject it, it was sort of thrust upon him with that kind of kernel of like, well, we know you don't really want to take the money, but think of all the good you could do. And that was sort of Judas's complaint at the beginning of the film,
Right.
which is, what are you doing? Like you've got this woman of the night washing your face and your feet in these expensive oils. Think of all, we could sell that and feed all these different people. Like, I think you're getting too
Right.
big for your britches, essentially.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the theme of the whole thing, that, that it just got too big too fast. And how do we delineate the message if we're trying to stave off the popular nature of this movement? It's become overwhelming for both the followers and the leader, as we see. I mean, such a simple message in this greatest story ever told, and again, you see it just expanded in so many different directions, where it becomes holier than thou rather than holy or glorious or powerful for an individual's soul. I mean, I'm not judging anybody. I'm just simply saying that sometimes you have to listen rather than talk. So
It's a lesson I think we could all learn, certainly me. Something that just
any
occurred to me, though.
highlights in the movie for you?
Well, I
Go
was going to
ahead.
say something that I hadn't thought of until just picking up on something that you were saying. This is a very odd kind of an Easter Jesus resurrection movie, because the resurrection doesn't really happen. We get the
Right,
crucifixion.
right,
We get that
right,
lovely kind of closing shot of the cross set against the sun, and as it pulls back, the cross is sort of like become taller than the sun, like overcoming death, right?
right.
And but at the end, like, the entire production just packs up the bus and goes home, which is another kind of framing
Which,
device we can talk to. But we don't
yeah,
see the bit. It ends on Good Friday. We don't see the resurrection and
right,
everything, although it's
right,
kind of implied that that's what's going to happen. What do you think? And I don't know much about the story or the movie, the history of it.
right.
Has that been discussed? Has Jewison ever talked about it, or
Yes,
Rice and Weber?
yes, they have discussed it. Yeah, it's not really Jewison, but it's the original source material. It ends on Good Friday. Um, the creators just felt, Rice and Lloyd Webber felt that people know the resurrection. How do we get to that point? Where are the thoughts and dreams and procedures that gets us to the resurrection? Now, one of the things I noticed, and I was just reading background material, is that they had a shepherd come through with a flock of sheep in the foreground. I don't know if you've noticed that in the last shot.
I didn't.
And it blew the production people away. Number one, they all had this profound journey with this film. I mean, they all came to a sort of religious moment as individuals, as actors and production crew and the director. But to have that last shot, which was basically the money shot or whatever they call it, to have that shepherd, you don't even notice it. I had to go back to the film and watch it again. And they said that was the happy accident that allowed that there would be that resurrection, that he would be the shepherd that would guide the sheep to the next realm. So, yeah,
And
I was blown away by that. And again, it was not the creator's intention to go to the resurrection.
well, because I don't want to speak to divine intervention or happy
Right,
accidents, but
right,
if you wanted to look at it from a certain angle, it might be God saying, "No, this bit really is important to the end of the story." Because I could see this being a controversial picture or story or musical for Christians, because that's sort of the whole point of why Jesus is
right,
recognized and celebrated as the Messiah, and what separates him in the history and the what I'll call the mythos of Scripture from the other messiahs is that he died and came back. The others,
right,
they came and went, but he's, the resurrection is the story. It's why we celebrate Easter, the rolling back of the rock.
right,
If not,
right,
it's just like Good Friday is when this really popular guy who thought he was the son of God, they put him up on a cross, and isn't that sad, I don't think we'd be telling that story today.
Well, you know, what's interesting too is, and I don't think anybody is not exposed to the Jesus story at some point, you know,
Right.
even if you're interested in literature, because it's just part of the mythos of our times. But I was thinking to myself, I was watching that there's such an air of mystery to what's going on. If you didn't know the story, you kind of would wonder where it was heading, you know?
Yeah.
But what are they going to do with this, this figure who is creating all this chaos? Well, they're going to kill him. But why would they kill him? And that just goes on and on with the biblical aspect of it.
Well, and they also draw a pretty clear distinction between the Father and the Son, and I guess the Holy Spirit, because it's kind of one of those questions that non-religious people will ask, like, well, if he's the Son of God, then what does it matter? I mean, he knows that it's all gonna, be okay in
Right.
the end, and he can't even really feel pain because he's God. And that was the idea, is that there was a distinct separation. So he did live among us. He did have, what you might call magical powers or abilities beyond regular people, but he did still have to there's an idea of, like, if I said, Pat, I'm gonna give you $1 billion, but for the next
Right.
day, you have to crawl through a field of broken glass. You might be saying, yeah, there's
Mhm.
something great on the other side, but this next 24 hours is gonna suck.
Right.
But I did like that distinction, because even at the end on the cross, when he's kind of calling out, why have you forsaken me? He's almost talking to himself, but on the other hand, he's not, because he's down there and he's not, again, there's that separation, because, God can do anything. He could divide himself like that. But I think that kind of gets lost in the conversation of, like, well, why didn't he just do this? Well, there's also the mysterious ways question. So,
Yeah. Well, there's two songs that really resonated for me this time. One is "I Don't Know How to Love Him," which is besides "Superstar," that's the one that everybody knows
yeah.
because it actually was a minor hit on the radio in many iterations. But I think when you talk about love, for example, I think that that's the key element, that we as human beings don't really, in essence, know how to love. We bring the emotion into our being, and we project it out into the universe based on our, the people that we walk on the path with. But do we really know what it really means to do that? And that song just encapsulates it. And then the second song was the something that was never in the original album. They wrote it for the Broadway musical. It was "Could We Start Again, Please?" And I think whenever something happens that is either a failure or a negative thing in your life, you almost do plead to the gods that if we could start again, I can make it right. But often that's not what life is. You go on your path, you make your mistakes, negative things happen, you experience profound loss, and we can't start again. That the plea in that song is so powerful to me. It's like, um, one of the lines is, "You even went a bit too far to get the message home." So it's, I mean, that's a major theme in the play, in the whole piece, that, how far do you go before the message gets overridden by the movement? I mean,
Well,
a lot of life lessons for today, I think.
right. And I think, it is difficult to start over again, but it is sort of
Right.
going back to the overall message of God and Jesus, and, their love for humanity, which is, and it's a controversial point, because people have said, well, how far does forgiveness go? Is it possible that if Hitler accepted Christ into his heart before he blew his brains out, could he have been forgiven? That's a whole
Right.
sticky wicket I want to get into. But the idea that there are very few places you could go to escape God's love and his wrath. The idea of kind of reinventing yourself, you know, it's there if you ask for it. the forgiveness and
Right.
also the ability to start over. And you can even take that to a secular place of, yeah, I did a lot of bad things.
Right.
I made a lot of mistakes, but as long as I'm still alive, there's still the hope that I can't maybe fix things, but I can at least stop messing them up.
Yeah. Those two songs really got me this time. Uh,
Every one of the
and
songs in this movie, I think, was powerful in some way. And I still can't
yeah.
believe that when I was 16, I thought this was boring.
Well, it's just, again, you're talking a cultural thing too. When I was of the age when it came out, it permeated the culture. You're sitting there in the 1990s when it's long past the influence that it had, and you're saying, okay, what does this mean to me? It doesn't mean anything when you're 16, I think,
Yeah.
unless you're 16 and having gone through it like I did. So there was a very significant element of my life that I always remember in association with this film. When it came out, obviously I was 13, and there was a group of people from my 7th and 8th grade class going to see the film as a group, and I couldn't get up enough courage to join them. And I always associate the film with that. It's just,
What were you
I
what
was
were you
thinking about.
what were you afraid of?
I
Or
just
what
I just kind of, it was that awkward time in your life where you're trying to understand what the next phase is, and I couldn't connect to that social aspect of it. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's
No,
part of
it's
my
it's
ridiculous journey.
it's very honest, and it sounds just like the dilemma a 12 or 13-year-old kid would have.
Right,
Um,
right.
but yeah, I mean, imagine like I want to visit the alternate reality where you can tell the version of the story where you did go, because
Could we start again, please?
touche.
I'd love to go back there knowing what I know now.
As as would we
As
all.
we all would. Yeah. Now,
I
what
want
did
to
you
talk.
think of the modern? I just
Oh, go
wanted to
ahead.
ask quickly, what did you think of the modern elements in it? The war machines, during the destruction of the money changers. There was a lot of modern stuff in that marketplace. What do you think?
Yes,
Just the whole framing. I guess we could talk about the framing too. Yeah.
and that's actually what I wanted to bring up. So we're
Okay.
simpatico on this.
All right.
I
Very good.
I kind of made a mistake earlier on where I was saying there wasn't a whole lot of modern commentary woven into the piece. There is, but it's mostly like visual cues. Things like having tanks, things like just a breathtaking sequence where Judas goes to kind of offer himself up to be the betrayer. And
Right.
when they're like, okay, we're going to set this in motion, you see two freaking fighter jets like going off to like kick things into motion. And like, these guys don't mess around. I also thought it was kind of brilliant where on the march to, I think it was the march to Pilate after Herod, or maybe it was the march to Herod. One of the things towards the end where Jesus is being escorted to the various people who are just keep trying to play hot potato with this Messiah. He's mobbed by the people in the streets, but they're all leaning in and they're pantomiming. They don't actually have tape recorders, but they're all doing this.
Right.
And they're saying,
Right. Right.
why do you
Right.
think you're the son of God? What do you hope to achieve by
Right.
this? It's like a
Right.
moving
Right.
press conference that I was just like,
Yeah.
this is something that you could transplant to, to 2023.
Right.
And
There's no aging of this film. This film works because it doesn't age. Um, but I don't think it could be made. All the iterations have come afterward. Now, PBS did a major production, and of course, we had the live version in 2018 with John Legend as Jesus. They just don't hold a candle to the interpretation of Superstar in its era. I think it's very significant that it was made at that time in the place that they made it, all around Jerusalem, where the actual events happened, in these ruins that are now protected. You could never film there again. I mean, a lot of different elements came together to make this work in its time.
I also think because of the time, I mean, one of the first things that you notice is it's like this hippie bus pulling up to this location in the desert, and they all unload the props. You see the cross like as an object on top of the
Yeah,
bus before you really realize what
right,
it is. And the first thing you notice is like it's a multi-ethnic, multi-gendered
right,
cast who is setting this whole thing up. And you stop and realize, and Godspell had a bit of this too, but you realize this is 9 years past civil rights. And it's telling this
right,
story of unity and universal love and acceptance.
right.
I mean, yeah, Jesus is played by, a white guy. I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon of the, 21st century and say, oh, how dare they? I mean, but it was just kind of the product of the time.
No,
But he's almost overshadowed by this, by Carl Anderson's Judas as, another main character. I kept thinking like he's got a bit too much rage in him. I don't know that I could have watched him play the messenger of peace, but I was like, this guy, I could watch him as the lead in this movie. And as you point out, he kind of is.
yeah. Well, that was the intention of the creators, to show the Jesus story through the betrayer. And really, it's almost like, as you look in the context of this story, it's almost like he was destined to do what he had to do to keep the movement on the right path. If Judas hadn't done what he did, Jesus wouldn't be who he was, in a sense. That's what I get from this.
Right. And you also
I
get, and
feel
that's
like
what I was,
I'm a theologian all of a sudden.
but no, I mean, we see the
Thank you,
same thing
Father
with
Pat.
we see the same thing with Pontius Pilate, because we've got these masses of people bringing Jesus to him and saying, crucify him. He's like, for what? He literally hasn't done anything wrong
Right,
except defend your sensibilities. And again, he keeps trying to play hot potato with it, and finally he's just like this braying mob. He's like, fine,
right.
this guy,
Yeah,
apparently he's got a
yeah,
death wish. I'm not going to deny him. Go ahead and do it. But it's always sort of been a question of, or at least in my mind, what happened to the souls, if you will, of Pontius Pilate and Judas? If they are in fact destined to carry this out, could they really
right.
be considered sinners? Because like, could Judas have said, no, I'm not going to do it? In which case, would he
Right.
be defying God? In which case he would go to hell anyway.
Well, that's again, and it goes back to, could we start again, please? We make mistakes, and we do things thinking that we're doing the right thing, and oftentimes it's a course direction that may not look right at the time, but then becomes right. So who knows? It's so interesting. Let me see. There was something I wanted to bring up in relative to that. Just the whole production element of it. Adam Egoin, the Canadian director, are you familiar with him?
Adam McGowan, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for pronouncing it correctly. He studied this film to learn to be a filmmaker.
Wow.
Because he said the genius of putting the music together with the visuals, which is something that Jewison and company had to do themselves because the Broadway play was no help, apparently. That he said that it really taught him how to, figure out the structure of story and how to edit something like that together because of the music.
Well,
there's not even many spoken words in it.
Right. I mean, aside from the songs themselves, I mean, this really is a story told through music. But there are probably a dozen shots in this movie where I was just blown away, and I was thinking, this movie, this was made to be a movie and evolve from a stage production.
And very good.
The one that comes to mind is when Judas hangs himself on that twisted tree at the top of a hill, which appears to just come out of nowhere. It looks almost like a perverted version of a cross. B, I don't know how the hell they pulled it off, because it looked like Carl Anderson was actually hanging from that tree, because we see him like plop down. I'm like, how is he not dead? But also the real cinematic part of it is we push out from the tree and we go down and we see that Pilate's castle or kingdom or whatever is just at the foot of this mountain. They don't do like a scene transition or a wipe or anything. It's all kind of taking place in view of where the rest of the story is being set into motion.
Right. And the superstar number does an interesting thing too. The little angel choruses, he doesn't cut until they do the full group. He makes the camera go from one group to another. There's no cuts there until the whole group is together doing the superstar chorus. It really, I love the beginning too with Heaven on Their Minds, where the camera swoops in on Judas, but keeps doing the same shot over and over, but he's in a different position. Really well done. I mean, when you see something, I don't know Norman Jewison's whole filmography, but when you see something like Fiddler's pretty straightforward. It's a stage play adapted into a movie. There's no real fancy cinema tricks in it. In this one, he seems to have freed himself to do all the cinema tricks, not tricks, but cinema that he could do to create this story. And it's just, freeze frame, slow motion, on the Herod song, he has the fingers in the foreground. I love that stuff, and it's truly one of my favorite movies of all time.
And mine too. I mean, like right after I finished watching this, I ordered the Blu-ray on Amazon. I was surprised to find out that there's not, at least from what I can see, there's not like a 50th anniversary 4K or anything on the way. I had to buy the one from 10 years ago.
I'm surprised. Does that have all the commentary on it? Because I read about that in my research. I'd never heard of it. I'd love to hear what Ted Neely and Norman Jewison have to say about the filming of the movie. Well, I interviewed Ted Neely.
What? Wow.
Yeah, about 10 years ago at an autograph show. He's done this role over 2,000 times on stage. Wow. He is Jesus. I mean, he is. There's nobody who understands that character more than he does. I don't think there is. And then also Mary Magdalene, Yvonne Elliman.
Who I thought she was.
They had the whole cast. Yeah, she's amazing. She's like the woman from Godspell who played it. She played it in the original concept album. She played it on Broadway. Then she played it in the movie. So it's quite amazing. She has a great story about that. She was discovered by Lloyd Webber in a coffee shop, just strumming a guitar and doing 60 songs. And he came up to him. Now think of it. He's 22 and she is 18, and he goes up to her and goes, "You're my Mary Magdalene." And she thought he meant Mary, Mother of God.
Oh.
And she thought, and so she created these beautiful melodies and these great songs, but didn't get a dime for it. He just completely cut off, even paid less than $20,000 for the film, which, of course, today is a lot more. But the point is, she went into the RSO, the Robert Stigwood organization. She did backup vocals for Eric Clapton, most famously on I Shot the Sheriff. So when Saturday Night Fever came along, Stigwood loved her so much that he gave her a song, "If I Can't Have You, I Don't Want Nobody, Baby." So she had the proper representation, got points on it. She said they sent her a check for $400,000 in the mail. I said, yes, somebody finally gets their due. To get a second act like that was amazing to me.
That's great.
But yeah, you can imagine.
Can we start? Can we start again? Yeah.
Yes. Could we start again, please?
Hey, do you have those? You said you interviewed them. Do you have that like recorded? Is that something I could post here or link to?
I would have to find them. Unfortunately, I had a lot of my interviews on a external hard drive that kind of went fuzzy on me, and a friend of mine is going to help me retrieve them. But I definitely have the words. So, I mean, you can link if you'd like. I can send you all the links to them. I'm going to republish them all next week because of the 50th anniversary. And but I have links to them, and I'll send you the links. Because it really, the insight to Ted Neely was really something. I could go on about that whole situation. That was one of my best able, to reach celebrities at an autograph show. They put them all in one place. Here's the superstar cast. Get you.
That
It was really weird.
Knowing now, because now
Right.
I'm in love with this movie. I
Yeah.
feel like I should say I'm insanely jealous, but that's not very Christian of me. So, I
He's still available, man. You'll get to him someday. But
all right, well,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, do you have any final thoughts on Superstar?
Well, I do. I think that if you really want to, if you're out there and you didn't necessarily grow up Christian, or you didn't, like us, we had the Catholic thing going. If you hadn't necessarily grown up Christian, or if you're Jewish or any other religion out there, I think you need to connect with this just to kind of understand how vague the whole thing was, and how it transformed into something that was a lot bigger than the personages that started it. And I think that's really the lesson of Superstars, that we're all human, and we do what we do, and if it comes to a point where it's very popular or above us, who are we to say what's going to happen afterward? So
Yeah.
I guess
I think that's very well said. My last point is, I kind of mentioned this earlier, the bit where he goes to see King Herod. It's strange because I'm watching this, I'm thinking in 1973, it could be seen as this, flamboyant guy with a bunch of like various alternative lifestyle stereotypes parading around
gender.
him. Right.
Yeah.
Well, but when I say it's like Jesus versus TikTok, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, I don't know how stereotypical this is today. It's just, everything is just so over the top that this would almost be celebrated, if you didn't happen to know the attitudes of the people putting it together.
Right. Also, I just want to mention too, and it's one of the strangest pieces of trivia from the movie. The guy who plays Peter, the guy who 3 times you'll deny me, he actually sings the background in Could We Start Again, Please? Because he ultimately would want to. He went on to become one of the most notorious porn directors of the 1970s Boogie Night era. I kid you not. So no wonder he was named Peter. And that's the best way to end this that I could.
I'm glad you ended with that, Pat, because my brain just short circuited, and I'm going to be monosyllabic for the next hour.
Look him up, Paul Thomas. Yeah.
Oh
man.
This has been our
weird
special
world.
This has been our special Good Friday episode.
Happy Easter, everyone.
A different kind of resurrection. Sorry. Anyhow.
This is great. I'm glad you reminded me. Yeah, this is a nice tradition that we got going. We were originally going to do the silent version of 10 Commandments until you told me it was 4 hours long. I said, no.
Yeah, we'll have to do that in 2 or 3 parts over the course of several years.
Yes, exactly.
But all right, sir. Well, thank you very much, Pat. Happy Easter. Happy Good Friday. And we'll talk again.
And also, too, thanks for taking the time to watch this very important film in my life. And I'm glad that I was able to discuss it a bit, especially at this point in my life, because it's gone through so many phases for my consciousness that to get to this point is very strange. Why is such a backward time in such a strange land?
Well, I mean, I think to what you were saying, other people of different faiths or non-faiths can watch this movie and still walk away with something. I think no matter who you are, it's a decent way to kind of check in with your conscience, think about your life and how you're living it and what your values are, and maybe just get a nudge in a more positive direction if you're feeling kind of lost. So
and to understand what power is and understand what glory is.
Yeah.
To quote the movie.
Well, this has been a glorious podcast, Pat, but I'm going to end it there, man. Thanks a lot, and we'll talk soon.
Blessings.
Blessings.
Cheers.
All right. Bye.